Imagine this. You're in the middle of a heated debate. Your pulse is pounding. Your mind races to craft the perfect response. Every second feels like a test of your intelligence, your wit, your dominance. You think, if I can just prove my point, I win. But what if I told you, by engaging at all you've already lost? Because according to Friedrich Nietzsche, true power doesn't come from proving you're right. It doesn't come from arguing louder or crafting the perfect rebuttal. In fact, the very act of arguing exposes your greatest weakness, your need to win. Nietzsche had a theory, a silent trick so powerful it makes words irrelevant, a strategy used by history's greatest minds, leaders, and warriors. So what is it, and why does silence often speak louder than words? Let's break down the psychology behind power, control, and the ultimate strategic weapon, silence. The hidden psychology of arguments. Why do people argue? At first glance, the answer seems obvious: to prove a point, to defend an idea, to seek truth. But Nietzsche saw something deeper. He understood that most arguments have nothing to do with truth, and everything to do with psychological survival. 1. Ego protection. The fear of being wrong. Admitting you're wrong feels like losing a part of yourself. Your mind resists it. Your identity is built on your beliefs, and when those beliefs are challenged, it's not just an argument, it's a threat. Think about it. How many times have you doubled down on an argument, not because you were sure you were right, but because the thought of conceding felt unbearable? This is why most debates go in circles. No one is actually searching for truth. They're fighting to protect their ego. 2. Power struggles. The fight for control. Most arguments are not about logic, they're about dominance. Who speaks the loudest? Who gets the last word? Who forces the other person to back down? In a debate, both sides think they're in control. But Nietzsche would argue that the moment you get pulled into the argument, you've already lost. Why? Because when someone can provoke you, they own you. The real power isn't in speaking, it's in deciding whether the conversation is even worth engaging in. 3. Social validation. Arguing to impress. Many people don't argue because they care about the discussion. They argue because they want to be seen as smart, confident, and dominant. They want to prove themselves to others. This is why political debates, Twitter arguments, and social media fights are so vicious. They're not about discovering truth, they're about performing. But Nietzsche saw this need for validation as a weakness. The truly powerful don't seek approval. They don't waste their energy convincing others. They understand that power isn't about being right, it's about being in control. Nietzsche's perspective. The moment you react, you lose. Nietzsche's philosophy of will to power teaches that strength isn't about proving yourself, it's about mastering yourself. And the moment you let an argument dictate your emotions, you've surrendered your power, because the real game isn't about who wins the debate. It's about who controls the conversation. So if power isn't in arguing, where is it? Nietzsche's will to power and the Übermensch. Most people misunderstand Nietzsche's will to power. They think it's about brute force, domination, or crushing your enemies. But true power, it's far more subtle. According to Nietzsche, power isn't about proving yourself right. It's about shaping reality itself. Will to power. What it really means, power is not in loud voices or aggressive debates. It's not in overpowering others through force. It's in control. Control over yourself. Control over your reactions. Control over how and when you engage. The truly powerful don't react emotionally. They don't get pulled into pointless conflicts. Instead, they dictate engagement. They decide when to act, when to remain silent, and when to make their move. This is the mindset of the Übermensch. The Übermensch's mindset: power through control. The Übermensch, the superior individual in Nietzsche's philosophy, does not waste energy arguing to be right. He doesn't fight for validation, he fights for control. He understands that most arguments are traps. The moment you engage emotionally, you're no longer in control, the other person is. Instead of reacting, the Übermensch observes. He lets others reveal their weaknesses. He chooses his words like a weapon, sharp, precise, and devastating. Example: the power of silence in action. Picture a high-stakes meeting. Two people are locked in a heated argument. Voices are raised, emotions are boiling over. And then there's one person who stays silent, watching, listening, calculating. When they finally speak, it's just one sentence, one perfectly timed response. And suddenly the entire room shifts. Who truly held the power in that room? The one who spoke the most, or the one who controlled the conversation without ever getting emotional? Nietzsche believed that true strength is not in the fight, it's in mastering the battlefield before the fight even begins. But he wasn't the only one who understood this. History's greatest minds used silence as their most powerful weapon. Let's see how. Legendary figures who mastered silent power. Nietzsche's philosophy of power isn't just theory, it's a strategy that has been used by some of the most influential figures in history. They didn't argue, they didn't waste words, they let silence do the work. Socrates, winning without fighting. Socrates never needed to prove he was right. Instead, he used a method so powerful that it's still studied today, the Socratic method. He didn't argue, he questioned. Instead of telling people they were wrong, he asked them questions, and with each answer, he led them to contradict themselves. Imagine a man boasting about his wisdom. Instead of challenging him directly, Socrates simply asks, "What is wisdom?" The man confidently answers. But Socrates keeps questioning. With every response, the man stumbles. He realizes on his own that he has no real understanding of what he claims to know. Socrates didn't need to win the argument. He let the other person defeat themselves. People don't accept being told they're wrong, but they'll accept discovering it themselves. Steve Jobs, controlled conflict. Steve Jobs didn't just lead Apple, he controlled conversations. Unlike Socrates, he didn't avoid conflict. He orchestrated it, but only when it served a purpose. He understood that arguing just to prove yourself right is a waste of energy. Instead of debating every small detail, he let others argue among themselves. He let his team express their doubts, their resistance, and then at the right moment, he would step in. He wouldn't convince them, he would make them convince themselves. One famous example, the iPhone's design. His engineers wanted buttons, Jobs wanted a full touchscreen. Instead of forcing his vision, he let them debate. He let them raise objections, until eventually through his guidance, they realized on their own that a touchscreen wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Jobs understood something most people don't. If you try to force people to see your vision, they resist. But if you lead them to the realization, they think it was their idea all along. Miyamoto Musashi, psychological warfare, before battle. Now, let's take this philosophy to the battlefield. Miyamoto Musashi was Japan's greatest swordsman, undefeated in over 60 duels. But his victories weren't just about skill with a blade. He won before the fight even started. One of his most famous duels was against Sasaki Kojiro, a warrior known for his deadly speed. Musashi didn't fight him head-on. Instead, he used psychology. He showed up late to the duel, making Kojiro furious. He arrived looking disheveled and careless, making Kojiro underestimate him. By the time the duel actually began, Kojiro was blinded by emotion, and in that moment of anger, he made a mistake. Musashi exploited it and won instantly. He understood a fundamental truth. A warrior who makes his opponent emotional has already won. Curiosity loop. The science behind silent power. This silent dominance isn't just historical, it's backed by modern psychology. Why do calm people always seem more powerful? Why does silence make people uncomfortable? Why do emotionally reactive people always end up losing control? Nietzsche's philosophy aligns perfectly with what modern psychology tells us about power and influence. Modern psychology behind silence and control. Nietzsche's philosophy of power isn't just an abstract idea, it aligns perfectly with modern psychology. The reason silence is so powerful isn't just because it makes you seem in control, it's because most arguments are built on flawed human psychology. Understanding these psychological traps gives you an unfair advantage over anyone who engages emotionally. Cognitive biases that make arguments pointless. Most people assume that arguments are about facts and logic. They're not. They're about mental shortcuts, biases that make people resist change. Confirmation bias. People only hear what reinforces their current beliefs. If something contradicts what they already think, they reject it, even if it's true. Backfire effect. The more you try to convince someone they're wrong, the stronger their belief becomes. Instead of changing their mind, they double down. Think about that. The very act of arguing doesn't just fail to change people's minds, it makes them more resistant. And that's exactly why the Übermensch doesn't argue, he influences. Emotional triggers. Why arguments feel personal. Most people think they argue over ideas. They don't. They argue over identity. When someone disagrees with your opinion, it feels like an attack on who you are. That's why political, religious, and philosophical debates get so heated, because people don't just defend their stance, they defend themselves. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He knew that when someone gets emotional in an argument, they've already lost control. The Übermensch doesn't fall into this trap. He doesn't react emotionally. He lets others expose their insecurities without saying a word. The need for validation, why people waste energy arguing. At the core of most arguments isn't truth, it's ego. People don't argue to find truth. They argue to be seen as right. They don't debate to gain knowledge, they debate to win approval. That's why Nietzsche saw arguing as a weak man's game. Powerful people don't seek validation, they don't waste time proving themselves to people who don't matter. Instead, they shape the conversation itself. Think about the most powerful figures in history. Did they waste energy arguing with critics? No. Did they try to convince everyone to see their vision? No. They let their actions speak louder than words. And that's why arguing is a trap. If you're constantly trying to prove yourself, you've already lost. Curiosity loop. So if arguing is a trap, what's the real strategy? If the goal isn't to argue, then what's the right approach? How do you actually control a conversation without wasting energy? The answer is simple: strategic silence. Let's break down exactly how to use it, how to use silence as a power move. Most people think power is in words. Nietzsche disagreed. He believed power was in restraint. Because the moment you learn when to stay silent and when to speak, you stop reacting to the world and start controlling it. When to stay silent. There are moments where saying nothing is the most powerful move you can make. One-on-one, when emotions are high, because reactive people lose control. If someone is yelling, getting defensive, or trying to provoke you, don't engage. Let them expose their weakness, while you remain untouchable. When your silence makes others question themselves, silence creates psychological pressure. People hate uncertainty. When you don't react, they start second-guessing themselves. Think about it, when someone insults you and you don't react, who really holds the power? Them, or you? When to speak silence is a weapon. But knowing when to break it is just as important. Only speak when it serves your purpose. Words should be spent like gold, not thrown around like spare change. Before you say anything, ask yourself, will this move the conversation in my favor? Am I speaking because I need to, or because my ego wants to? Is this the right time to make an impact? The truly powerful don't speak to fill silence. They speak to control it. Strategic silence in action. Want to see how powerful silence can be? Next time you're in an argument, pause. Instead of reacting immediately, observe. Watch how the other person exposes their weaknesses. Let them reveal their emotional triggers. See how they scramble to fill the silence, revealing more than they intended. And then when the moment is right, say just a few words. Not to argue, not to prove a point, but to shift the entire conversation in your favor. Curiosity loop. But does this mean you should always avoid arguments? Not necessarily. Silence is a powerful tool. But is it always the right move? What if conflict could actually make you stronger? The balance between silence and conflict. Silence is powerful, but does that mean you should always stay silent? Nietzsche didn't believe in avoiding conflict out of fear. He believed in choosing conflict strategically. Because avoiding conflict isn't wisdom, it's weakness. Nietzsche's will to power. Conflict is growth. The Übermensch doesn't waste energy on petty arguments. He doesn't engage in pointless debates. But when a battle is necessary, he steps in with purpose. Because some conflicts are worth fighting. Think about history's greatest leaders, thinkers, and innovators. They didn't waste time arguing with fools. But they also didn't run from challenges. They used conflict to sharpen their thinking and test their strength. That's what Nietzsche meant by will to power. Not just domination, but growth. When fighting sharpens you not, all arguments are distractions. Some debates refine your ideas, forcing you to think sharper, expose weaknesses, making you stronger, push you beyond limits, forcing you to evolve. This is the difference between mindless debate and purposeful conflict. The question is, are you arguing to grow, or just to prove yourself right? When arguments are just ego traps, Most arguments are not about truth. They're about pride. If you're arguing just to protect your ego, you've already lost. If the other person isn't open to change, you're wasting energy. If the debate is just an emotional battlefield, silence is your weapon. Final power move. Choose your battles like a chess master. Mastering power isn't about never arguing. It's about knowing when to engage, and when to let silence do the work. Like a grandmaster chess player, you don't react to every move. You calculate, you wait. And when the time is right, you strike. So ask yourself, are you reacting emotionally, or are you controlling the game? Imagine waking up one day with only 100 words left to speak. Every sentence, every word, now carries weight. Would you waste them in a pointless debate? Would you spend them proving yourself to people who don't matter? Or would you choose them carefully, like a warrior sharpening his final blade before battle? The real test of power isn't in endless words, it's in the silence before the words. The pause that makes others lean in, waiting for your next move. So the next time you feel the urge to argue, pause. Ask yourself, am I speaking out of emotion, or am I choosing my words like a weapon? Because true power is silent. Want more insights on philosophy, power, and psychology? Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started.